This is the intro. I've been thinking about ways to sort of restart my output of videos on this channel, and I think one way that came to mind, but I thought would be particularly beneficial, would be to spend fairly minimal time and effort discussing my favourite films. Because ultimately, talking about the things that I love, and in particular my favourite films, would be a pretty easy video making. I think I was getting too in my head about being intellectual and discussing some profound and interesting film topics, when in actuality, I don't necessarily need to do that. Instead, I can naturally find some interesting points of discussion through some enthusiastic dissections of my favourite films. Now, if this video proves successful in any way, and by that I mean if it's a video that I, find a degree of enthusiasm and joy in making as opposed to any sort of financial benefit, we're not there yet, then I might make it a recurring series to discuss more of my favourite films and why I love them so much. Now, if this video was coming to you from Anthony several years ago, we'd be in trouble, because my favourite films list was always changing. I mean, quite infamously, I came out of The Hobbit: Battle of the Five Armies upon only one watch and declared it my favourite film ever. Suffice to say, I'm a changed man now, and I hope you can all forgive me for my past indiscretions. However, nowadays I have a more concrete list of favourite films, with my top bunch having barely changed for the past few years, and one film in particular has remained at the very top of my list for ages. In this video, I'm going to break down and explore Lynne Ramsay's 2017 film, You Were Never Really Here, and why it is my favourite film. Considering my declaration of You Were Never Really Here as being my favourite film, it would go as no surprise that the director, Lynne Ramsay, is also my favourite filmmaker. For anyone in the dark, Lynne Ramsay is a Scottish director who has made numerous fascinating and beautiful short films, as well as having a very short but considerably impressive filmography. Her feature film debut was Ratcatcher, a slice-of-life drama exploring a young boy in Scotland and how his life is permeated by grief after an unfortunate event involving his friend. It would very much set the tone going forwards for the rest of her films, most of all being the presence of death and its impact on its characters. She would follow up with the unusual, fascinating and supremely underrated film More Than Colour, which only further expanded on these ideas of grief and trauma and how the protagonist reacts to it in a very raw and profound manner. Perhaps her best known work is We Need to Talk About Kevin, a film about a mother confronting the horrendous, despicable actions of her son and how these actions have impacted both her and her image. It is a bleak and harrowing story that Ramsay captures with incredible sincerity and a deep level of human connectivity. Perhaps the most important thing to take away from her work, more so than anything else, is that her interest in death and grief is focused in such a way that she's exploring the deepest levels of human emotion. After only 3 films under her belt, we finally reach her most recent film and the topic of this video, You Were Never Really Here, which follows a mercenary who is hired to find a senator's missing daughter. It was released to critical acclaim in 2017 at the Cannes Film Festival, winning both Best Screenplay for Lynne Ramsay and Best Actor for Joaquin Phoenix. I studied More Than Colour years ago during my A-level film studies class, and I was completely taken by Ramsay's unique directorial style. I'd quite literally never seen a filmmaker approach stories the way that she did. Suffice to say, my excitement for You Were Never Really Here was on another level, and it continued to exceed and blow me away on every subsequent viewing of it. I've seen it like 10 times now, and each time I love it more. The film is incredibly important to me, both as a stylistic and thematic influence on my own writing, acting and filmmaking, but also as a constant reminder of my deep passion for film. For me, the peak of the mountain is to work with Lynne Ramsay one day. So I've made it abundantly, aggressively clear that this film means a lot to me. So what better than to break down my love for it on a public video platform where myself and the film can be inevitably torn to shreds by strangers and friends alike. And I tell you what though, bring it. Yeah, I can take it. I can take all you motherfuckers. One of my biggest takeaways from this film is its focus on character. There is a deeply enthralling and exciting story at play, steeped in the usual gritty neo-noir flavours that you would associate with the genre. But what is most intriguing is how Ramsay isn't necessarily interested in that, but rather more interested in its protagonist, Joe, and how his mind operates. Joe is a really unusual protagonist. He's very closed off and quiet, oftentimes volatile and highly aggressive. He flagrantly involves himself in a violent, dangerous occupation, oftentimes executing it with a cold, calculated, and even gleeful manner that can only suggest the workings of a psychopath. In any other film directed by any other person, a character like Joe could potentially become a parody, disingenuously represented as a one-note protagonist or anti-hero. But Ramsey cleverly capends much of Joe's less than desirable qualities with caveats. He's a violent gun for hire, but he specialises in finding and rescuing girls who have been abducted into sex trafficking. He's incredibly volatile and prone to unusual behaviours, but he's also a war veteran, a former FBI agent who is racked with guilt and PTSD. Ramsey aptly described Joe in an interview as a man with a head full of broken glass, which is such a beautiful and profound way of illustrating how fragile his mental state is. He is a man constantly battling against his own mind. Therefore, the actions he chooses to make throughout the film are important in demonstrating his true character within. There's very few actors with the level of commitment and intensity that Joaquin Phoenix brings to a role. Phoenix is just truly remarkable as Joe, exploring and presenting his inner chaos in a sensational but also sensitive way. From the cold, empty stares that give a window into his fractured soul to the explosive expressions of fury, Phoenix consistently represents Joe's complexity in as compelling and as naturalistic a manner than anyone ever could. Ramsey pays special attention to Joe's infantilization with death. He surrounds himself with danger in all aspects of his life, not just in his occupation. We see him playing with a knife as he dangles it above his mouth and drops it upon his foot just to pull it out of the way at the last second. He is constantly toying with the idea of hurting himself. This strange manner in which he toys with danger is given a far more tragic undertone as we learn more about the abuse that he and his mother endured when he was younger, making moments where he is lingering around train tracks or asphyxiating himself a very harrowing and tense expectation that he's a man with little care for his own life and a willingness to just let it all go. But despite the tragedy of his past and the violence he actively surrounds himself in, there is a glimmer of light in his life that is taken in the form of his mother. I mean, there are a number of scenes where Joe and his mother, played by Judith Roberts, are just hanging out, singing songs, polishing spoons, just fucking shooting the shit. These moments, as small as they may appear, function as an important reminder that despite everything seemingly going askew in his life, his mother is his anchor, a fellow survivor to bring him back down to reality and offer some comfort in this bleak world. Understanding who Joe is and where he comes from is at the centre of this film. Exploring Joe's trauma lends to our investment in the film and therefore the story at hand, as we begin rooting for him to succeed in rescuing Nina, a character whose own trauma becomes a mirror of Joe's past. Never has a film been so pure and honest in its assessment and exploration of its protagonist. Joe isn't as simple as an archetypal hero. He isn't explained to us. He is just presented to us as this messy contradiction. This is what makes him feel so human, and Ramsey and Phoenix do such a superb job at communicating that to us. As if it wasn't enough having the acting prowess of Joaquin Phoenix, Lynn Ramsey only went and got bloody Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead to compose the score for the film. Yeah, I know. You fucking nerd, Anthony. Besides his various contributions to music, including Radiohead, Johnny Greenwood has offered a lot to cinema as a composer. His works on films such as There Will Be Blood, The Master, Phantom Thread, and probably most recently Power of the Dog, have been crucial in establishing those films' unique tone and direction. He is a master of creating abstract soundscapes as well as thunderous, mesmerizing string arrangements. All of those things are more present than ever in You Were Never Really Here, as well as having a deliciously throbbing synthetic quality to it. Greenwood's score is so important in nailing the film's brooding atmosphere, along with the slick, well-crafted sound mixing. The opening of the film sets the tone early on, as it shows the audience a black, empty void of noise before swimming shapes and forms of light begin to bleed through onto the screen. The overlapping noises of whispers, city ambience, and Joe's venomous self-damning sentences create a sense of uncertainty and confusion. On reflection, this strange, vague opening becomes important in giving the audience their first insight into Joe's psyche, as if we had been thrown into his warped, disoriented mind. The unusual sound mixing and layering alongside Greenwood's dark ambient score is expanded upon as the film continues, as the soundtrack begins to incorporate more glitchy tones and eclectic mixing in order to reflect the messiness of Joe's thoughts and feelings. There's a wonderful video I'll link down below in the description by Fandor about Greenwood's compositions. It does a far better job than I ever could at explaining his unique style, including altering time signatures in the soundtrack for You Never Really Hear to heighten the feeling of uncertainty and trepidation. I mean, it's an excellent video. I would highly recommend you go watch it. Let's show Johnny Greenwood some love, okay? He looks like he needs it. I'm joking, I love him. One aspect of the score I want to particularly highlight is the track Tree Strings. Now, this is, as a musical piece, remarkable to me. I mean, I enjoy listening to a lot of ambient music and weird orchestral drones and soundscapes. I know, right? Shocker. Who would guess that I would listen to that? But Tree Strings has a particularly profound impact on me. In terms of a listening experience, a lot of that is due to the rising and falling in tones and how the song gradually builds and layers upon itself, adding various layered drones to its string arrangements as it transcends into this mesmerizing, mystical piece of music. The song also acts as an important addition to one scene in the film, a particularly stunning moment that is only further emphasized through Greenwood's track. After the rescue of Nina goes wrong, and everyone he knows begins being picked off one by corrupt police and government agents, Joe discovers his own mother has been murdered in an attempt to cover up the deep-seated corruption Joe has inadvertently stumbled into. Joe wraps up his mother and takes her out to the city to a lake where he slowly submerges them both beneath the water, rocks weighing them down as they are dragged deeper and deeper and deeper. What follows is one of the most beautiful but heart-wrenching moments I've ever seen in a film. As the mesmerizing sways of light whip around Joe, his mother sinking further and further away, only the faintest glimmers of her white hair left visible as she is consumed by darkness, his beacon of hope lost forever. Surrounded in shadow and his own life slipping away from him, Joe resigns himself finally to death, as Greenwood's music swells and builds in a reflection of Joe's final moments. It was this scene, this moment, that really cemented You Were Never Really Here as being my favourite film. I mean, never has it felt like a film has more accurately portrayed grief and trauma in such a heartfelt but poetic manner. And this water burial scene has been burned into my mind forever. Much of that impact, besides the sensational imagery and use of lighting, is due to Greenwood's fantastic music and the emotive power of the track Tree Strings. But as the track slows and fizzles out, and Joe is left stranded within the water, we are greeted with an image of Nina also drowning. This innocent girl was dragged into a terrible circumstance no child should ever be dragged into, much like Joe. So despite the depression and hopelessness in his life, Joe finds a new light to follow as he removes the rocks from his coat and swims back to the surface for one last chance at giving Nina what he never had, and that's hope. In case it wasn't apparent through my description or the clips and the pictures that I'm showing from this film, Lynne Ramsay's approach to filmmaking is very unconventional. She places a heavy emphasis on cinematic expression and conveying narrative through visuals and sound, as opposed to just having characters tell the audience exactly how they should feel. I love great dialogue. I mean, I can always appreciate the sort of back and forth and monologues that the likes of Greta Gerwig or Aaron Sorkin or Quentin Tarantino are able to come up with. But as someone who has often fallen into the trap of just overly explaining or including too much exposition in his own writing, I am often resistant to a lot of dialogue-driven narrative. What I love so much about Ramsay's writing and her directing is that the focus on communicating the story doesn't come directly from the characters. We don't need Joe to tell us how he is feeling because we can clearly see it, and as such, feel it too. The storytelling is done in the edit. For example, I've mentioned before about how Joe is a military veteran and a former FBI agent, yet none of that is ever explicitly mentioned in the film. I mean, all of it is told and conveyed through precise, clever flashbacks that are framed as Joe's memories, often triggered through his PTSD. As Joe is trying to unwind and mentally prepare himself for rescuing Nina, he experiences a flashback to a very traumatic moment when he was in the military, where a child was shot by another child. We receive very little information and practically no dialogue, but by simply showing us two American soldiers dancing together in a desert, we can assume we're in the Middle East somewhere, perhaps Iraq, considering potential historical context. Additionally, we see the exchange of a candy bar before that same child is shot by someone else. We then see the dying child lying down, twitching in pain as another body lies next to them, perhaps Joe again. Despite it not being clear, we can assume this is Joe interacting with the kid, due to the memory being so vivid and told through extreme close-ups, suggestive of the moment being intimately known to Joe and why it would be so triggering to him. It's both efficient storytelling through flashbacks as well as being appropriately reflective of Joe's feelings. Another similar moment includes when Joe is reminded of his time in the FBI, with insert shots of dead girls piled upon one another in a crate, as well as later on a brief shot of him wearing an FBI hat, spliced into the scene, being effective enough to communicate Joe's backstory and to contextualize his trauma without ever needing someone to verbally explain it to us. I mean, God, it is just so good. I'm gonna scream! Additionally, Ramsey uses some brilliant and unique camera work and composition throughout to convey emotion and to further heighten the storytelling, such as having a POV shot of Joe moving through a hallway to heighten tension and suspense, only to have it pull away slowly once a police car comes into frame. It communicates to us Joe's angst and trepidation, and the fact that he doesn't want to risk running into the police and getting caught for his less than legal actions. It communicates so much to us, all with a simple dolly shot. Another aspect of Ramsey's visual language I particularly love is her fascination with the small details, the things that would otherwise be forgotten. This can be seen throughout all of her work, such as Morven Caller investigating a worm that wriggles around on top of a carrot, or Kevin biting his fingernails off and neatly placing them on a table. These seemingly insignificant inclusions matter to Ramsey, whether it offers a moment of quiet reflectiveness for a character or is used to emphasize how they are feeling. It all services the characters and the emotion, and as such grounds us deeper into the experience of the film. I really do love these small moments where the camera lingers on a very simple yet very beautifully composed image. It often feels spontaneous or pure in its need to capture essences of life. I mean that is what film is about after all. It's capturing moments of time and allowing those moments to tell a story. It's small moments like that, alongside the larger story beats throughout You Were Never Really Here, that establishes it as a pure piece of cinema. Mark Kermode described it best in his review of the film when he said, "It talks a cinematic language." Sure, sounds arty and pretentious to say, but bear with me. For me, You Were Never Really Here is one of the most purest forms of cinematic expression ever put to screen because of how much it says without saying too much, how much it shows you while never giving away all of its cards. I mean, Lynn Ramsey makes poetry in motion, and her films always strike an accord with me in a way no one else could, besides perhaps Barry Jenkins or the Daniels. Her approach to narrative and her willingness to bend the rules of genre and storytelling is what makes You Were Never Really Here a compelling and rewarding experience. You're left enraptured and enthralled by it, with little to say or think other than, what a beautiful film. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really do encourage anyone who hasn't seen the film to give it a watch. It won't be everyone's cup of tea, but I'm surprised how many people I have watched it with have actually enjoyed it. It's always tricky sharing your favourite films with people. I mean, there's always that concern that perhaps they won't like it and you've just wasted their time and you'll look silly forever suggesting that you watched the film in the first place. Plus, asking strangers on the internet to watch it too is double the risk, but I have such an abundance of love for Lynn Ramsey's work and for You Were Never Really Here that I could never worry about what anyone else thinks about it. There's just something so deeply empathetic and human about Ramsey's films. Themes of death, grief, trauma, family, loneliness, they can be upsetting or hard to explore, but I think there's something very profound and sensitive in the way that Ramsey presents those themes and gets the audience to look inward on themselves. Being able to just gush about your films is very cathartic and arguably less annoying for all of those people who would usually have to listen to me in person ramble away aimlessly. I mean, if this film was anything to go off, you could expect some pretty hard-hitting favourite films for the future. I'll try and sprinkle in, fucking Chicken Run at some point, or Chicken Little. There's a lot of chicken films I quite like, actually. Let me know what you thought of You Were Never Really Here. Make sure you've got Chicken Little to watch afterwards. Share your thoughts in the comments. I look forward to posting my next video, but until then, stay safe and much love. bye.